Regardless of when the next election comes, there will be a lot of new faces in the House of Commons when it's over. As noted by our colleagues at the Hill Times, so far, 14 MPs across all parties do not intend to run in the next election, 10 Liberals among them, with long-serving party stalwarts like Carolyn Bennett and Joyce Murray choosing not to reoffer. So what are the opportunities and the risks for the Trudeau government here? Polls analyst and publisher of the Writ.ca, Éric Grenier, has been looking into that, and he joins us now. So Éric, 14 MPs overall, 10 Liberals so far. Is this an unusual number at this point when the government's been in power for 8 years?
No, it actually isn't. When you're looking at the number of MPs that usually don't run for an election, for re-election, it's actually quite a big number. In a minority parliaments tend to be shorter. About 9% of MPs historically don't run for re-election. In a parliament as big as one we have now, that would represent about 30 MPs, so the number is likely to double. When we're talking about majority governments, and of course this government is a minority government, but is going to probably last for 4 years, as long as a majority government, usually have about twice as many MPs not running for re-election. So it might be a little bit early to already be signaling that you're not going to be running again, but if the next election is in 2025, it would not be unusual to have 40, 50 MPs decide that they're not going to sign up for another 4 years.
Okay, but with the list we have now, and some of those could actually lead to by-elections in 2024, depending on when they decide to go. And in some cases, those will be Liberal MPs. It's a government that needs a jolt, it needs a boost. I mean, where are some opportunities for them to maybe get some star candidates to run in these seats to re-energize things if that's what they want to do?
Yeah, it's not always a bad thing if an MP is not running for re-election when they've been there for a long time in a safe seat, because it means that they liberate a safe seat for people to fight over the nomination. So there's a few of those happening. Emmanuel Dubourg, Bourassa on the island of Montreal, probably one of the safest ridings for the Liberals in all of Canada. You have ridings like Vancouver Quadra, Joyce Murray in BC. And you have also, what was the third one? Guelph, of course, in southwestern Ontario. These are ridings that stuck with the Liberals in the 2011 election. And if a riding stuck with the Liberals back then, they're probably going to stick with them now. So these are places where you could put a star candidate. You could try to attract a good candidate to come in. That not only helps win that riding, those ridings probably would stick with the Liberals anyway. But if you can get a name that you can then send on tour in neighboring ridings, then that can be really helpful. So these kinds of ridings, when they open up, there's usually a big fight for the nomination because that is really usually the biggest kind of election in those seats.
What about, say, where the Liberals could be in trouble, other than, say, all of them? I don't know if that would be your answer. I mean, given where things are right now, the double-digit deficit in the polls, I mean, there's real risk there if an incumbent leaves and if an incumbent leaves early. Where could that be? Yeah,
absolutely. Because some of these ridings were won by just narrow margins. Nipissing, Temiskaming in Ontario, Anthony Rota, he only won by a few percentage points. The fact that he's not running again probably means that that's just going to be even harder for the Liberals to hold. When an incumbent doesn't run for re-election, usually is an impact. It can be anywhere from up to 5-6 points. But then there's lots of other ridings where they're still going to be hotly contested. So the Liberals have to find good candidates. You know, Markham-Stouffville would be one of them. Mississauga Centre would be another, and Fleetwood-Port Kells in British Columbia. These are ridings that the Conservatives won in 2011. Some of them were won by pretty big margins by the Liberals in the last election, but they're also in areas that tend to swing when a government swings. So for the Liberals, they need to make sure that they can find some good candidates to take those spots, because those are winnable seats. Tough to win, but they're still winnable seats. And so they need to make sure they have some good names. In other ridings where they only won by a narrow margin, if you can just find someone to put a name up and have a sign on the lawn, that's about as good as it's going to get.
All right, Éric, always appreciate it. That's the Writ.ca's Éric Grenier. All right, well, the Power Panel has been listening in. They're back with me now. Sherelle Evelyn, Jordan Leichnitz, Tim Powers, and Jonathan Kalis. So, Sherelle, your paper did all the work here. Abbas Rana's got all the dirt on the backbench of all the parties of what they're going to do. I mean, what were the parties saying, to you guys as you were compiling this list, and where do you think this goes?
Well, there's a few different factors that come into it, and what Abbas is really good at getting into all of that stuff because he's, our star reporter there. But MPs are finding it a lot harder than it used to be an MP. So it's not that difficult to imagine that when you're thinking about, am I going to put myself up for this for another go-round, that really does weigh on you. So when you add in all those different elements, like the fact that this is a minority government, we don't know when the next election is going to be. We can assume, but we don't know. it's likely to be a change election. So are you going to put yourself, through all of the hassle of running again just to be, wiped out and potentially embarrassed of losing your seat when you were an incumbent already? Like, that's also something to keep in mind. And the fact, there was more than 140 MPs in 2015. So that's 8 years. Pension kicks in at 6. People, if you've done the gauntlet for 8 years, been there, done that, didn't make cabinet, made cabinets, did what you wanted to do, maybe it's time to move on. And when you have, you don't know who the leader is going to be, potentially, you don't know what's going to come next. There's all of these different elements that really tie into of whether or not this is something that you want to hold on to for another go around.
Yeah, a massive amount of uncertainty, and Jonathan, a massive amount of anger out there. It's not a happy country right now. We're seeing that in all democracies, really, in the West, in terms of how politics is going. But Éric identified what he calls opportunities. Seats like Bourassa in Quebec normally would be the place, okay, this is a renewal opportunity. Let's get someone to go in there. But after 8 years and, with all the factors Sherelle outlined, is it the same opportunity it once was?
Well, I mean, it's still pretty much a safe seat, I would estimate. One of the safest in the country. The question is, do you want to go in with at least the potential of going into opposition? I guess is the question at this point. From what I'm hearing, that riding, there are dozens of people who have at least thought about it and be interested, because it's a safe seat. And you have a few of those, and I think Carolyn Bennett seat, Joyce Murr's seat, those were mentioned.
Yeah.
Why are people leaving, and why would people want to come in? Those are two separate questions. You have the question about, well, after 8 years, you have your pension. Do you still want to be a backbencher? It's not the most fun for a lot of people. At some point, you get bored. You had the expectation that maybe not the first go around, but eventually get into cabinet. At this point, after 8 years, I think the writing is on the wall if you haven't gotten in yet. So, those are all the considerations about leaving. About coming in, people ran in 2015 when the Liberals were the third party, and they got a lot of fun, young, exciting candidates running all across the country, and seats that certainly weren't guaranteed. So I think the opportunity is still there. It's a matter of, well, do people want to, commit to the public service part of what that is all about? It's long hours. It's unforgiving. The amount of vitriol that politicians face these days, just in public in general, and then on social media, there's a lot of reasons not to do it. But I am hopeful, and it's not just for Liberals, that people in general across party lines, good people, will want to run. But I don't think it's the partisan issue. I think it's, do you want to get into this mess right now? Because it's ugly.
Yeah, well, I like the word you used, renewal. Because I think there's two streams of it, and Jonathan alluded to it a little bit. If you're a Liberal candidate and you're looking at the polls now, renewal could be a longer game, as it was in 08 and 11 until they won in 15. So your calculations could be very different. So if you're in your 40s or your 50s, that could be fine. If you're a little older, that may not be what you want to do. I mean, it's interesting. St. Paul's is a fascinating riding. I think hell would have to freeze over if it before the Liberals lost it. And you hearing the name of a very, very capable, able person, Leslie Church, well known around here, senior political person who's been well regarded and well respected. That if Leslie does run, that could be a long play for her and good for the Liberals if they can snag her. But you look in our part of the world, so if renewal and how you think about renewal is one thing, if you're the Liberals, it's also recruitment. For the first time in ages, and you were just home for 19 days, I'm not hearing names of people who want to put their name on a Liberal ballot federally in Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm hearing lots of names of people who want to do that for the Conservatives and some who want to do it for the NDP. So when you look at these retirements, that probably influences your own level of enthusiasm, because Lord knows in politics it's easier to recruit people when they sense you can win, because there's this thing, David, called opportunism that sneaks in, and certainly...
Tell me more.
I know. And renewal doesn't sound as exciting as opportunism, and opportunism is on the side of the Conservatives today, and in some ridings, the NDP.
But, Jordan, it's interesting when you look at where some of the departures are going to be. It's not just the volume, because you can lose a bunch from safe seats and pretty easily restock.
Right, yeah.
But you look at Helena Jasic in Markham-Stouffville. You look at Omar Alghabra in Mississauga Centre, Ken Hardy in Fleetwood-Port Kells. These are the battleground areas and rings in the major cities that decide who holds power in Canada.
Absolutely. And it's going to be so critical to see if the Liberals are able to attract really compelling candidates in those seats. And I think that's going to actually be a little bit more the crystal ball about their fortunes there than actually the decision not to run again. As Éric said, I think to me this isn't really a surprising number of people not running again. You know, a lot of folks on that list are people who served for a very long time, and you know, and I think particularly about the West Coast MPs, that's a very long commute. That's very tough on people and families, and so you know, there does come a point where people say that they're not so keen to fight another campaign and potentially sit in the opposition benches. That's something that isn't very surprising. And I think we also have to acknowledge that the next campaign is likely to be a very tough and a very negative campaign. And I do think that that also factors into people's decisions, because they have to, even if they want to be reelected, they have to come to that battle one more time. And the tone and tenor of it really makes a difference. It's a lot more fun to get on the ride on the way up than it is on the way down.
Yeah, and I actually think the next election is probably going to be one of the worst we've ever seen. It's just the mood and the vibe and where it's going to, and the personal distaste between the leaders is going to drive some of that. But Cheryl, we could have some by-elections even before that, right? Like definitely in Carolyn Bennett's seat, maybe in Omar Alghabra's seat. I mean, what's your sense of what we might see in terms of change even before we get to the big sweep of renewal in the election?
Yeah, I mean, and then timing, of course, of these is going to be so important, because you want to disadvantage your opponent as much as possible. But everybody's looking at these seats and everybody's waiting. And a lot of these places, especially Conservative, they're already ready. They've got their candidates in place. They've been eyeing these seats for quite some time. There are some seats that we haven't, like Erin O'Toole's seat has yet to be filled in Durham. Like, so they're starting to stack up already, and waiting to see, you know, I believe it's 6 months before a general election that you can't have a by-election, and so all of those little calculations will have to come into play. And so whether or not we actually see these by-elections come to pass, I think is the first question to ask, is before we even figure out who's going to run in them.
Jono, what's your sense on the level of concern inside the Liberals of having multiple by-elections potentially in the next 12 months? Is this something they're prepared for, concerned about? What's your read on it?
I think right now you're really focused on two by-elections, the Erin O'Toole seat and Carolyn Bennett seat. I think we're coming up on the deadline for Erin O'Toole's seat to have the by-election. So I think what you're going to see is them being paired together, and they'll be on the same day. And what you're likely to see, unless hell freezes over in St. Paul's, is that the Conservatives keep Durham, and that the Liberals keep St. Paul, and then the punditry sits there and tries to analyze that when safe seats were held by the same parties. You know, in a by-election, when we don't know when the next election will be, we'll try to read into it. That's what we have.
23% turnout.
Well, we'll definitely book you. Jono, we're definitely going to have you back. What's at stake in Durham and what's at stake in St. Paul?
Exactly. No, I don't know that is something that is really driving them. Yes, they control the timing of it. You know, I think we'll have it in the spring, and it'll be what it'll be. And I don't think it'll be indicative of much. Could others decide to retire before the end of the term? It's possible, but I wonder if the Omar Alghabras or the Helena Jasics haven't decided to quit now, when are they going to do it? Like, why? Either they quit now, or they're going to go to the next election. That's my guess,
right?
And I think that's the feeling inside.
Right. So, team, it's going back to the situation in Newfoundland and Labrador, and to some degree Atlantic Canada. Like, look, it's a small sample size of friends and family that I saw over Christmas. Didn't hear a lot of joy with the home heating oil carve out. I didn't get the sense there's any kind of a lift there. And I even spoke to some people in the provincial Liberal government when I was there, and they're kind of worried about the timing of their upcoming election and the timing of the federal election because of anger at Trudeau, maybe playing out at the provincial. Like, it is a tough place for Liberals in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Well, and look at the laboratory there now. There is a provincial by-election in a progressive conservative held riding.
Right.
A friend of mine, friend of yours, former colleague of both of ours, Fred Hutton, running for the Fury Liberals, who are styled as Team Fury. Nair, red on that sign. ne'er mention of the Trudeau Liberals, because what is happening there, as was the case in Nova Scotia, as John O knows, the provincial Conservatives are trying to link them together because they sense that anger. Thus, again, bringing it back to the federal scene, it's so difficult right now because all anger at the broad macro political level seems to start with Justin Trudeau, and then others have bits and pieces parsed off of them. The only other thing I'd add about these by-elections, should they come, and I don't think it'll be the two that we've talked about that John rightly described as being so riveting and so meaningful, is if there are other ones in potentially Liberal-held seats, do we see Mark Carney, a name often talked about, because the other thing that starts to play itself out here as you talk about the big R renewal is who's going to lead this, because eventually, Justin Trudeau will step aside, and if somebody's not in now and they want to get some credibility, as all the party people here will tell you, now's the time you get the credibility. You go in when it's tough, not when it's easy.
Okay, quick last word.
I have a hard time imagining Mark Carney wanting to sit on the backbench in the official opposition.
And I don't wish that on poor Mark. He's a good man.
That's right.
All right. Maybe France needs a central banker. I don't know. He's done it in 2 countries. Maybe he can do it in a 3rd. All right, gang, we're out of time. I want to thank the Power Panel, Sherelle Evelyn, Jordan Leiknitz, Tim Powers, and Jonathan Kalis.